So for you, has there been an agenda in society by, I'm going to call them darker forces, I don't know the words to use, but some sort of agenda to dismantle that beautiful dynamic of allowing a man to take the lead, to support, to provide, to protect, and the feminine to nourish, and all of that medicine and magic that comes from that unit?
On the most extreme end, like on the darkest end of that pool, 100%, there is a very, very deliberate intention to dismantle the family unit. Most people, even if they are progressing that energy, they're not conscious of what they're doing. They're not trying to dismantle the family. They think they're trying to make things something better. They're trying to optimize it because it's based on their fears. So like, I fear this thing, so it can't be good, so we have to change it so I can feel good. Not thinking, again, narrative trumps reality. So they're not thinking I'm representing some dark force to dismantle the family unit. They're just thinking, hey, what if women had more control, or what if, whatever the case may be, like whatever that narrative is. We don't need men, or a man is a luxury, not a necessity. Like, there are so many narratives that go out, and for men as well. Like, you don't have to be a provider anymore. Women are, everything is equal now. So it just neutralizes everyone, makes women a little more masculine, men a little more feminine. And I don't like to go down conspiracy, theory rabbit holes, but there's just what happens when you have a society of people who are completely separate from family. You just have, easy to control, is divide and conquer at the primal level. This is like the first institution of humanity, is family. If you can separate that, there's never going to be power within the individual. There's no sovereignty in a silo. Sovereignty comes from recognizing your core strength as a family, and then as a community. You can't be sovereign in a state where every man's for themselves. That just goes against civilization in its inherent sense, whether it's ancient civilization or modern. Like, the tribe has always been important. The first tribe is your family. And so if I destroy that tribe, then everyone's on no man's land. So I can control anyone to do anything, it's just, and I don't think people think about it that deep. I think and I've seen people, and I can tell intentions when people say things. It's like some people really believe that by dismantling the family unit, they're going to create a better society, because how they view men in general is very negative. They have no positive viewpoints about men whatsoever. And I'm like, that's a very scary place to be, because your narrative is so strong, you don't see any positive in the opposite sex that's required to procreate. And it's very scary, but it's where we are. It's like an underbelly. I don't think most people are conscious of it. So I will say that narrative is true, and I try to get people to realize, like, if there was two extremes, which one do you think you'd be on? The one that's super, super pro family, or the one that's super against it? And it kind of makes them think a little bit sometimes, like, well, I'm pro family, and it's like a very the dissonance that disconnects them from their ideas. I made a post on Instagram recently, maybe a few weeks ago, that talks about a woman who doesn't desire a masculine leader. It's an unnatural thing. And initially people were like, oh, I disagree. And I made a post like, well, if you had two options, one man who's very masculine, competent, he's leadership qualities, and another guy who's incompetent, no leadership qualities, which one are you picking? 100% pick said the leader, but it goes against the narrative. I don't want a leader. It's like, well, if you don't need a leader, why would you want one? It's not like that, it's like an interesting thing. And I think we're just so far removed from just primal sense. I think the word leadership has a negative connotation. Everything masculine has a negative connotation. So there's no good leadership. But we recognize it when there's poor leadership.
Yeah.
we have to if we want to change leadership that we seem at or deem as bad or negative or incompetent or inefficient, we have to highlight what is positive so we can optimize for that. And a lot of boys who are growing up in the same society, they're not getting trained to become better leaders than the men of yesterday, because they're being told that we don't actually want men to be leaders at all. So they're becoming more incompetent. And then those men grow old and they become adults. And then people say, why aren't you competent? And they're like, what? I thought we weren't supposed to be competent. I thought we weren't supposed to be leaders. It's a very, very confusing message for men and young boys. And we see in the last 20, 30 years, men are dropping out of high school and college faster than women at higher rates. And now we're at the point where women are graduating in higher proportions than men. And what does that look like 50 years from now if you have a world full of highly educated women and uneducated men? You know, for the people who are like, okay, we just want to, reverse everything. But there's a reason some things are the way they are. It's like, do you want to be the person who has to grind for 40 years to survive? I've said this before, I don't know any woman who wants to do one job for 50 years and then retire. 40 hours a week for 40. I don't know any woman who wants to do it. You ask a man if he finds what he wants to do, he's like, oh yeah, I'm cool with that. It's just that we have different energies, and I think there's a space and time for career, space and time for business, space and time for everything. But I hold women and men in high regards for different things. I believe women should have the space and the freedom to say, hey, I want to do this now. I don't want to do that. That's the freedom of choice. That's the feminine energy. It's like letting that femininity breathe to say, hey, I have options to do this. Not that I have to do this, or otherwise I won't be able to eat tomorrow. That's a very, very distorted place to put a woman in my personal opinion. For a man, it's okay, in order to provide that, you have to have some kind of authority within the household. Doesn't mean you're a dictator. It just means you have to have some kind of leadership qualities. You have to have some kind of vision, some kind of goal planning, some kind of intention setting to know what direction your life is headed and how it's going to impact your family. If you don't teach young men that, we're still going to have sex. So babies are still going to be born. If they're born with men who have been trained, they will be better off for it. But if they're born with men who weren't trained, what do you expect for those women to suffer through for the next 30 years of their life as they raise their children? And they're going to suffer. So it's like this empowerment on the back end. It's not a beneficial thing for women to have to work 40 hours a week, have to take care of the kids, get everything ready, organize everything, plan everything. It's exhausting. And family is meant to, family is an institution, it's division of labor. So it's, I'm going to do this part, you do this part. We can figure out how to split it up. Whether it's you do this, I do that, that doesn't matter. It's a matter of this has to be done. Which parts are you good at? Which parts am I good at? Let's figure this out. And if you have a man that's not forward thinking enough to think about how is labor being divided, the woman's going to end up doing 75% of the labor. Emotional labor, spiritual labor, etc. It's not just they both go to work, because then we have that dynamic. There's so much more to, masculinity and masculine feminine dynamic and leadership than just the financial aspect. And some of those traits we're pushing women into, we're forcing them into those spaces because hey, you have to survive, so figure this thing out. And honestly, the women of yesteryear can't really teach the women of today that, because they didn't experience that same lifestyle in the same way in this modern era. The world is so much different in the last 30 years than it's ever been. You take any 30-year period of human life, this is the most drastic changing 30-year period we've ever had. And so it's who gets to train who knows what. And so we have a lot of women who are kind of just freestyling it. I'm just trying to put it all together and save face and just stay strong. And it's do we not think that someone should be there so she doesn't have to stay strong, that she can depend on someone? Not that she's incapable of doing it, because she can do it, but if she does it and she ends up being burnt out, is that a plus or a minus?